to pop up on your screen and you just press got it. And then as always, a lot of our presentations are recorded and we post them on our YouTube channel. You can access that by just searching our organization's name on YouTube or on our website. You can access it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today. That is Miss Kimberly Chapman. Some of y'all may recognize her as she is a frequent volunteer here at Alzheimer's Services. She is the Financial Wellness Director for Neighbors Federal Credit Union and has led the charge for their mission to provide financial education to members of the communities that they serve. She is a certified credit union financial counselor with almost 30 years of experience in the financial field. She is a former caregiver herself, and so she understands a lot of the challenges that we hear about and we face all day, every day as dementia caregivers. And she's been very generous of her time over the last years that she shares with us at Alzheimer's Services, not only her expertise in the world of finances, but how that world relates to and impacts the caregiving world. So I will go ahead and ask that you'll welcome me in joining Miss Kimberly Chapman. She is going to remain unmuted, and then I am going to pull up her slides on my screen right now. Like I said, we did have some technical issues, so we appreciate you being understanding if we do have to kind of make any adjustments throughout the presentation today. Ms. Kim, I'm gonna pass it on over to you.
All right. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the warm welcome. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. As Brooke said, we've had some technology issues. I have a love-hate relationship with technology, and today I'm hating it. So forgive me because it is not working the way that it should, but I think we'll still be able to get through it. I'm really, really excited. I'm always excited when Brooke reaches out to ask me to give a hand, especially since I have a good relationship with Alzheimer's of Baton Rouge because my dad had Parkinson's. And when I say that they were a huge resource for me during that time, that words cannot express. So anytime she asks me day or night to come and do something, I am always here. And I hope that today I can share some information that will be useful and beneficial to each of you. All right, so we will go ahead and get started, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As she mentioned, I've been in the financial world for close to 30 years now. Of course, I still keep telling people that I'm only 35, so we won't do any math in this particular class. But in addition to my experience in the financial world, I was also a caregiver for my dad for 4 years. He passed in 2020 from Parkinson's. But I think what's really, really important, or why I feel that it's important for me to share my story, is I had to use my professional knowledge along with my role as a caregiver. And as a caregiver, we don't stop being the other people, right? If you look at my little image, as a caregiver, I was still a mom, I was still a neighbor, I was still a sibling, I was still a parent, I was still a wife. And so I had to juggle all these many, many hats and try and figure things out. And so I hope that some of what I learned I can share with you to make this journey a little bit easier. Okay, next slide. So today we'll talk about lessons on money management. And let's see, I'm trying to go on my side with the slides as well. So we'll talk about the different roles of a caregiver and the responsibilities and defining those roles so that as a caregiver, you know how to find transparency in what is expected of you or what you need to do. We will talk about a caregiver financial assessment, right? Because if you're a caregiver and you're having to take care of somebody else's finances, you want to make sure that your finances are well as well. We want to look at your loved one's financial assessment. How do you understand where they are, what their financial needs are? And then, of course, we'll have some tips on managing and budgeting for your loved ones. And then, of course, lessons learned. All right, next slide. So the journey of a caregiver. So there's so many different stages of where you may be as you join in on this particular presentation. You may be someone where your loved one has or yourself have just gotten a diagnosis, right? You're in the beginning stages, just trying to figure things out, learning as much information as you can, and it's a great place to be. And I think being on this call is a great resource of information. You may be a seasoned caregiver, and maybe some of the things that you've tried before are no longer working, or you're just looking for new resources to help you stay balanced and grounded as you help your loved one. Or maybe there's been a pivoting point. I can tell you from my experience with my dad, and I'll share a lot of information about him as we go along. He was as healthy as a horse, right? And it was just one day he had the Parkinson's diagnosis, but didn't really show any symptoms. There was maybe a vague little tremor, but he had one incident that really was a life changing incident for him personally and definitely medically. And so it could be that you're at this pivoting point where something has changed, and this may be something like an acute medical issue that you're now having to face. And so I think what's important, one of the things that I had to learn, and if you look at the image, it says, stop looking at life in your rearview mirror. You're not going that way. I think it's really, really easy when we're faced with things that are challenging that we get stuck on. We want things the way that they were. We want to turn back the hands of time. We want the clock to go back to yesterday. I know for my dad, it was literally night and day. On May 31st, he was fine. He had an accident, and believe it or not, June 1st, the next day, everything forever changed. And I found myself stuck for a long time looking back in that mirror. And so I thought it was important to share that with you, because there is hope even when you look forward, because that's the direction that we're going. We don't want to get stuck looking in that rearview mirror, because we're going forward. For many of you, if you've ever ridden on an airplane, or even if you've just seen a movie, before the plane takes off, the airline stewardess comes down the aisle and she explains some safety measures. And one of the safety measures that they always go over is if there's a loss of cabin pressure or oxygen. And they talk about this mask that will drop down from the ceiling. I imagine most of you that are on this call are just nurturers by nature, right? You're in this caregiver role because you have to take care of somebody. And I think as a nurturer, it is our natural instinct to care for others before we care for ourselves. But if you think about, what does the airline stewardess say? Put your mask on first. If you have small children around you, they still say, put your mask on first. If you're a caregiver for somebody else, put your mask on first. Why do they tell us that, right? Naturally, we want to protect our children. We want to protect our loved ones. We want to make sure they're safe. Why? Is because you cannot pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure you're strong. You need to make sure you're okay in order to be able to help others, to be able to pour into others. And as a caregiver, that's exactly what one of your roles is, to be able to pour into that person that now needs support. But in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're not pouring from an empty cup. One of the most powerful tools that I learned and depended on during my journey as a caregiver was a journal. You'll find that a lot of the tips and tools that we'll talk about are just simple, everyday things that you have access to. The power of a journal, to-do list. As a caregiver, no matter where you are in this journey, again, at the beginning, if you're a seasoned caregiver or if something has recently changed, being able to write down your thoughts, your emotions can be very, very soothing. It can be very, very therapeutic. You can use this journal to do a to-do list, all right? Because you may have a scheduled routine that you need to keep up with your loved one. Prescription schedules, what time do they have to take medications? Task lists for supporters. There'll be a point where I'll actually share with you my task list. And my parents, my dad has been deceased now for 5 years. And for some reason, I still have this list. I still have this routine that I went through vigorously for almost 4 years. Using this journal for a budget, changes in their health. This can be extremely important because sometimes subtle changes individually or isolated may not mean anything, but collectively, there could be something impactful about your loved one's health. And so, documenting those changes, information for your healthcare professionals, questions that you want to ask doctors. Being a caregiver can be very overwhelming. We know that our loved ones may be overwhelmed, but we could be overwhelmed too. And I know for me, I had to always write down those questions so that when I was in front of his healthcare professionals or in front of his doctors, I would have that information available for me. If I had to rely on me to just remember every little detail, every question that came up in between appointments, I would have never done that. So having a journal is a really, really powerful tool. Get one if you don't have one. Again, you can have multiple journals because as you can see, there's so many different reasons that you can use a journal and you can see just how helpful they can be. Now I want to pivot and talk a little bit about the roles of a caregiver because again, as I said, we don't change who we are. We have so many different responsibilities. We're still going to be an employee, a wife, a mother, but we want to focus on what are our responsibilities as a caregiver. And the first one is can be defined as a companion. You may be somebody that's just there for emotional support, for friendship, right? Just to be by that person's side, just to have a conversation with them, to keep them company. Another role can be defined as a personal assistant. Maybe you're helping them schedule appointments, maybe even taking them to appointments, helping them dress, simple little tasks, right? Then there's the medical assistant. This person could be responsible for tracking medication, managing doctor visits, or even advocating for that person's care. And then, of course, you could be the person that's that financial assistant. And you may have all of these hats, all of these roles all into one, but that financial assistant, that's the person that could be taking care of the business affairs, the legal affairs. And so it's really clear to define early on what is your role? Are you a companion? Is it just limited to you being there for that emotional support? Do you need to have hands on assistance with this particular person? Are they dependent on you for their medical care? And are they dependent on you to take care of their bills and expenses? Another role or another factor that you want to determine are the personalities, because personalities really, really matter when you're having to be a caregiver. Because when you think about it, you're really sometimes going to be in that person's personal space and for long periods of time. And understanding their personality can help enhance the quality of caregiving that you provide for that particular person. You know, we can love a person and a person can love us, but do we always like the people that we love? Do they always like us? So, understanding those dynamics, understanding those personalities. Are they an introvert or an extrovert? Are they public or private? I can tell you my dad was a very private person. He didn't want anybody to know anything. And can you imagine if every time somebody came over to the house, I said, "Hey, come on in. I'm just sitting here talking with my dad. He's got Parkinson's. Did you see his hand shaking?" He was very private. He didn't want us to discuss anything. And I don't know whether it was just his own personality, was he embarrassed about it? But I had to be really, really respectful and understand that he was a private person. Some people want everybody to know what's going on, but it's important that you understand who you're dealing with, what their personality trait is, and it will make your caregiving a whole lot easier. Is that person trustworthy? All right. Are they mistrustful of individuals? When you're a caregiver, or sometimes you may have the aid of other caregivers having to help you, are they going to be trusting of those individuals in that house? Because again, the more trusting that they are, sometimes the easier it is for that relationship for you to get things accomplished. If they're mistrustful, if they have reasons to not trust the people in their homes, then they can make it a very difficult relationship. Are they dependent or independent? Can this individual do things on their own? Do they have the mindset that they want to do things on their own? I know after my dad got his diagnosis, after he had an acute illness, a fall, he still wanted to drive. He had been independent his entire life. No one had ever driven him around. So it was very difficult when we had to take those keys away, when we had to start taking him to doctor's appointments, to the grocery stores. But understanding his mindset that this was a person that never had to be dependent on anybody in his life was really, really important to me as a caregiver and how I interacted with him. All right. My mom, on the other hand, while she did not have Parkinson's, she was more of a dependent. She loved being driven around. She loved people going to the grocery store for her. So they were opposites, but I still had to understand how each one's personality was independently so that I could be a caregiver that fed into what they were dealing with. Are they prideful or are they a humble person? Are they fun or are they serious? Right? Some people love to laugh. They embrace life, and everything is the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. Or are they just a really, really serious person and they're not really into jokes? Understanding that personality again can make that relationship stronger. Are they a saver? Or are they a spender? We'll spend a great deal of this time talking about budgeting, talking about financial matters, but understanding how this person handles their finances is going to be very, very important. How do you handle your finances? If you're a spender and they're a saver and you're now the caregiver, you have to understand what their financial perspective is. Next slide. So, in the beginning, you want to be able to understand and acknowledge what your support system is. This is going to be the foundation of what gets you going, what pours into you, your support system. Who can you count on for support? Family members, are you a spouse or significant other? Are there siblings, children, parents, extended family? Who's in your corner? Who's a part of your village? And then how can they support you? There's so many different ways that a caregiver can receive support. There's time, right? Not everybody can provide financial support. So maybe it's their time, giving you an opportunity to have personal time away, especially if you're having to be a caregiver around the clock. They can come and sit with that person. Maybe they can take them to appointments, help them with errands. Maybe it is financial support. Maybe you have family members, they don't live close to you, so they're not able to come over and provide that time. But maybe they can provide financial support. Emotional support. Emotional support is so important. Who is that person that you can talk to, that you can share information with? Who is that person that can pour into you? So, understanding what your support system looks like. Have they offered support? But most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. And I could not put that bigger or bold enough. Do not be afraid to ask for help. I think one of the worst things that can happen to a caregiver is that they make assumptions that if somebody doesn't offer help, they don't want to help. If somebody doesn't offer money, they don't want to provide financial support. And they may be on the other side saying, oh, well, she didn't ask for any assistance. He didn't ask for any assistance. He's got it all handled. They look like they're doing well financially. We don't need to give them any money. Nobody asked for anything. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And it could just be sometimes just that phone call, just somebody to talk to. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I cannot reiterate that enough times. So So we've talked about different roles. We've talked about being that companion. We've talked about being a financial assistant, a medical assistant, right? We've talked about being a personal assistant. But even with those different roles, there's always going to be boundaries that you want to be respectful of and understand what those boundaries are if they exist at all. And so I like to think of when we're defining those roles and we're defining and understanding authority, I like to think of it as a business. And so when you think of a business, there's a sole proprietor, right? One chief, one kahuna. That's the person that's making all of the decisions, right? You're in charge of the person that you're caring for. You decide when they go to the doctor, what they eat, how to help them with their finances, how to dress. You don't have to consult with anybody else. Maybe you're an only child, maybe you're a spouse, but it's not necessary for you to have to consult with somebody else. It's not a joint venture. But on the other hand, maybe it's a partnership. I'm the middle child. I had an older sister and a younger brother. And while I was the caregiver, I still was not the only person that could make those harsh decisions. I had to consult with my siblings, right? There was a partnership between us in order for us to make decisions. Or is it a corporation, a large family? I come from a small family, so that was a blessing, and that I only had one sibling, one brother and one sibling. I'm sorry, one brother and one sister to consult with. But some families are large. I know lots of people that have tons of siblings, and can you imagine what that dynamic may look like? And so it's very important that there's transparency in terms of what types of decisions does the family need to make together? What kinds of decisions as a caregiver can you make on your own? Again, this is one of those situations where you definitely do not want to make assumptions. Put those agreements in writing when possible. If you're having a meeting with your family, with those that are important to that loved one, take notes. Put things in writing. This is what this person's going to be responsible for. This is who can make this type of decision. That transparency and clarity will go a long way. This random document that you see here, I just wanted to share this with you because, again, in terms of being really clear with instructions, notes, responsibilities, it never hurts. You can never have too much information. This was just a sample of a document that I had in my home whenever we had caregivers come in from the outside. And it was very detailed. This was basically what would happen when my dad would get home in the afternoon. And as you can see, it literally had a timeline. I wanted to make sure that I covered everything. What did the caregiver needed to do? Seat Mr. Mitchell in the lazy boy chair. I even explained where he would sit so there wasn't even a question, should he be on the sofa? Should he be in the kitchen? What were his snacks? What foods he could eat? What foods he couldn't eat? Where they could find these things, right? What could he drink? So think about those things as a caregiver, especially if you have to hand the baton off to another family member or another support system to help care for your loved one. What's the important information that they need to know? Have a chart like this. This is very, very helpful because, again, it's transparent what needs to be done. And then it's being seen by anybody that has access to that loved one that may have those responsibilities. Dinner time, shower time, where everything is located, what this person likes. I mean, even being specific with the water temperature. If you notice, if you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see the screen, but it said preheat the shower, turning it to 12 o'clock position, right? Because a little too far to the left at 10 o'clock may have been too cold, or a little too far to the right may have been too hot. So just getting that precise, because I knew exactly the water temperature that my dad preferred. And so being really, really specific with those things can be really helpful. Highlighting those things that are important, that he's a high fall risk, that he has dementia, that he has Parkinson's disease. Because I know for me as a caregiver, some of my support system were CNAs, and that there were caregivers from agencies that maybe had never met my dad before. They were working with him or sitting with him for the first time. And they come in at 7 and I need to leave to work for 7. There's not a whole lot of time to have a whole conversation to get them acclimated to your loved one. So again, always have something in writing that expresses what are the wishes of you or anybody else that's important to that loved one that's going to be taking care of them. I'll pause for just a second to see if there are any questions before we start talking about the financial assessment part of it.
If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat box. I don't see any yet.
Okay.
If we're waiting on it, maybe a minute to see if we have any other ones. I love that you have kind of put in there, you know, the things that you wish every caregiver would know. If you're just meeting like a caregiver right off the street, you know, a random person that you just interacted with and you hear that they're a caregiver, are those the exact things that you would tell them, or do you have any other pockets of wisdom that you would tell a caregiver?
I definitely would point out those things that are really, really important about our loved ones. You know, the person that they're going to be taking care of. If there's anything distinctive, if they need the TV volume turned up loud, um, if they like their food heated a certain way, cut up a certain way, prepared a certain way, just something that's going to make that transition between them, your loved one, meeting a new person, making that transition as smooth as possible.
Oh, okay, good deal. We haven't received any other questions yet, so I guess we can carry. Oh, okay, here we go. They're from Rachel. I have a problem with creating detailed information for carers, and they don't read them, even when I go and point out the important parts. Any
There's
suggestions there?
Well, for me, I didn't make a copy of the reverse side of that, but there was actually that document had a checklist, and I hate to say required, but I guess required is the correct word. I required them to go through that and initial it daily. So there was a reverse side of it, and I'm trying to see. I think I actually have it handy here, and so it was kind of a checklist to make sure that they did that. If you're still having problems with that caregiver, if you're going over lists and providing them with that information and they're not following that information, then it may be time to either review the caregiver themselves in terms of who's allowed to come in the home to take care of your loved one, or maybe have a consultation with that agency, because again, it can be challenging to find what we find are quality individuals, because we're going to always feel like nobody can take care of our loved one as well as we can. That, I think that's just nature, human nature. But I created these guidelines because I think at some point in time I may have had issues the same way that you may be experiencing. I would tell the individuals those certain things and it wasn't being done, or it wasn't being done the way that I specified. So I created this checklist, and I'm sorry that I don't have the part where they would initial it, that backside, but they would actually initial that they did something right. And to me, I think that made them really acknowledge it. Instead of just glancing it, they had to go through it because it said, fled, it said fed client, or did the client have a bowel movement? Just all of those different little things that you may need to know about their interaction. I required them to fill this out. So again, if you're having a conversation and they're still not responding the way that you would, that could be, time to have a conversation to see if you need to reassess who that caregiver is, or again, maybe talk to, if it's with an agency, and see if they have some suggestions. But it did work for me. I had these notes pretty much all over the house, different in the bathroom. Sometimes it was little things like, even though our wipes say that they're flushable, they're really not, based on the number of times I had to call the plumber to the house. But just putting those little reminders up and hoping that that individual will, adhere to it. Sometimes maybe picking up the phone and just reminding them during the middle of a session, hey, did you have an opportunity to do XYZ?
Got it. Wonderful. Well, good deal. Let's carry on with the rest of the presentation, and we'll hold the rest of the questions for after.
Okay. All right. So now I just want to focus a little bit on the financial aspect of it. We want to talk about budgeting analysis, credit analysis, and banking analysis, because this is going to be really, really important, because finances will become an important role in your journey as a caregiver. So the first one is a self-assessment. So as a caregiver, it is really, really important for you to understand what your limitations are. What can you do? What type of financial assistance are you able to provide for your loved one? And so you want to start out by creating a budget if you don't already use one. And a budget is simply a plan for your money. You can go to the next slide, Brooke. A budget is simply a plan for your money, right? It's an account for your income less those expenses that you have. And of course, we're looking at your net income, what you're bringing home after any deductions, taxes, things of that nature. There's so many benefits of having a budget, but especially for a caregiver, because we're already stressed. We're already being pulled sometimes on both ends. And so it can help you avoid that financial burnout, and it can help reduce stress. It can help you identify where your money is going and help you identify hidden costs. And I'll show you how a budget can do that shortly. It can ensure you're not overextending yourself financially. It is so easy for us as nurturers to juggle things. And if you think about a juggler, they have three balls in two hands. And if you can be really, really good at tossing them around and never realizing that you don't have enough hands to carry the load that's in front of you. And so you want to make sure a budget will keep you grounded and keep you aware of your financial situation so that you're not overextending yourself. It definitely makes it easier to plan for your medical expenses, any travel that may be involved, or even for something like respite, which is very important. And then it can also help you qualify for any need-based support programs. There are different programs that exist that, based on your income, it may provide you with assistance, but generally they will need to know where you stand financially. And it's important that you know the answers to those questions. You can put your hands on documents, pay stubs, tax returns, the things that they may need to determine if you qualify for those benefits. The next slide is just an image of a budget worksheet. But what's really particular about this particular budget worksheet, or if I ever do a class on how to complete a budget, one of the things that I'm really particular about is being thorough, not overlooking or taking for granted those small expenses. So you don't have to have a special budget, right? You don't have to, you can go online and there are tons of different budget worksheets that you can locate. But if you look at this one, and I'll just help you go through it, it details your housing expenses, everything from whether you have a rent or mortgage, all the way down to your water and sewage bill. You want to detail those individually. Don't get in a habit of just saying, oh, I pay about $300 or $2,000 for my housing expenses. Actually go through and itemize those. Be aware of how much you're spending in any area, especially if there comes a time where you may have to make some modifications to your budget. You will know exactly how much money is going to which area, and which areas you may be able to actually cut back on. Same thing for car expenses. Is there a car payment? How much are you spending on gas, on insurance, even maintenance? The list of your debts. What do you owe? Because again, this is all right now. The camera is on you. You're looking at your finances so that you can understand what type of financial support you can provide, or what type of financial strain this may have on you if you are already overextended. The second page just goes into more detail. Again, grooming, gifts, birthdays, clubs, memberships. You want to be as detailed with a budget as you possibly can. Again, you don't have to have a fancy budget. You can use basic pen and paper, but the key here is to be thorough, right? If you have kids, grandkids that you frequently offer financial support to, that needs to be in your budget, even if it's not a structured amount where oh, well, I give so and so $50 every week. It may be every time you see them, you give them money, but you can gauge on a 30-day period, how much financial support am I providing to my kids, my friends, my neighbors, whatever it may be. But you want to be detailed. Don't leave out the little things. If you go to the car wash, if we get our hair done, our nails done, right? If we eat out, what do we do for entertainment? Be very, very detailed with your budget so that you can understand where you are financially. Now, once you've completed that sheet, at the bottom, you're going to have a set of numbers. You're going to start off with how much money you have, and you're going to see how much money you spend. Ideally, you would want to have a positive number because the goal for everybody, for any consumer, is to live off of less than what they make. We want to always spend less money than we actually make. That's always going to be the golden outcome. But as we know, life does not always unfold that way. So if when you've completed your budget, when you've completed your worksheet that shows how much you're spending compared to how much you're actually bringing into the household, there are situations, there are going to be times when there may be a deficit. You realize now you're spending more than you bring in. What do you do? How can you handle that situation? For starters, reducing your expenses. And how do you reduce expenses? For starters, paying bills on time. Sometimes we don't realize that we take for granted. We'll pay something late because we get our check late. We'll get the money from somebody else a little bit later. But that can often increase our expenses because then there are late fees or additional interest. So one way to reduce expenses is to make sure we're paying any obligations we have on time. Review your statements. Um, our statements give us a lot of information, and I think because we're in such a digital age, we tend to gloss over actually reading our statements, but we can find information there that can be helpful. What are we paying for something? Are we paying for services that we don't need? When is the last time you've actually looked at an itemized bill? Your cell phone bill, maybe your cable bill. Often we pay for services that we don't need. I'll share a story about my dad when I started taking over his finances back in 2016. He had AT&T phone service. And I don't remember the exact amount of his bill, but I would say it was about $100. And so I decided to go through his bill line by line. One of the lines was long distance service. Now, keep in mind, I did say 2016. And for those of you that can relate to what long distance service was, it was when we had landline phones and you dialed a number that was typically outside of your area code, and there was a surcharge that usually was per minute. Now, that was definitely before cell phones came on the scene. And so he had a long distance package or a long distance plan with AT&T. But mind you, in 2016, he had a cell phone. So any long distance calls that he made, which were very few and far and in between, he used a cell phone. But yet, part of his $100 monthly bill, he was paying about $16 to have a long distance plan. Clearly, AT&T was never going to pick up the phone and call him and say, Mr. Mitchell, you're not using this service. Can we delete this from your bill? They were happy to collect that $16 as long as he was paying for it. And he probably didn't pay attention to it. So it's so important that we review statements because easily I eliminated $16 from his phone bill, just like that, just by reading what he was paying for. So review your statements, everything from credit card statements. There could be insurances there that maybe you weren't aware that you were paying for. And not to say that you may not still want those services, but be aware of what you're paying for. Look for your statements, look for where there may be errors or where you're paying for services that you don't need. Shop with a list. Being a caregiver puts a lot of stress on a person. I emotionally eat rather than emotionally shop. I have friends that emotionally shop. And so, one way to cut down on emotionally shopping is shop with a list. Go to the store with intention. and not just to buy things that will make us feel good in the moment, because that can lead to excessive debt. Buy generic instead of brand. Shop at thrift stores. I will tell you, one of the things I recently learned, I host a podcast for the credit union, and one of my coworkers is an avid thrifter. I didn't know anything about thrifting, I just knew what it was. And so she introduced me to a world of thrifting beyond my belief. I think I thought of it was old, raunchy, hand-me-down clothes, and it is the exact opposite of that. I found so many wonderful things that I can use for my home that I would have paid full price for at the store, and I could go right here to a thrift store and find barely touched. Sometimes they're actually new, unused products there. So these are just some ways that you can cut down on expenses. Look at services that you're paying for that you're not using. Streaming services, gym memberships. These are all ways to reduce expenses. Next, if you've reduced your expenses as far as you can or as much as you can, look at ways to increase your income. There may be opportunities to explore remote work, because I can understand as a caregiver, you may be limited to the time that you can work outside the home. Check and see if you are eligible for caregiver stipends. Sell unused items. If we all look around our homes, we have stuff. Everybody has stuff that we use, but even more stuff that we don't use. And this is a climate where so many people have the opportunity. We used to call them garage sales, but of course, this generation does it online, and they're able to take just everyday things in their house that they don't use and sell them online to generate extra income. I'm sure you've all heard the quote, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So you'd be surprised the little items that you have in your home that you thought were a good idea when you bought them, and now you're wondering what made you buy that item. You may be able to sell it and bring income into the home. Turn a hobby into income. Sometimes we have hobbies. We're an artist. We can create things. Maybe you can sew. I definitely cannot, right? And so we have so many different hobbies that we may be able to turn into an income, again, just to increase our income. And then there's some people that actually thrift shop for income, meaning you go to thrift stores, you might buy something for $2 and then sell it at a garage sale or sell it online to somebody else for $10 or $20. My coworker does this all the time. I'm never, shocked when she finds something that seems like it's nothing. The thrift store selling it for pennies on the dollar. And sometimes it's something of real value. And then it's something that just may be valuable to the person that wants it on the other end online. Now I want to spend a minute talking about your credit assessment. So you've looked at your budget, you've looked at what your income is, what your expenses are, and you have an idea of what you have access to, what your cash flow is. But another important component of knowing what your financial situation is your credit assessment. And so you can go to places like annualcreditreport.com, Credit Karma, CreditWise. There are a number of different platforms where you can access your credit report, but it's really important that you look at that credit report and you want to view it on a regular basis, because you want to make sure that the information is accurate. And this will help you understand what your buying power is, what your borrowing power is, so that you will know that for today, even though you may not need to borrow money, but you'll also know for tomorrow what situation might entail, especially a medical situation where maybe you need funds to borrow money to put in a ramp for a wheelchair, redesign a bathroom with bars, right? There are all sorts of medical situations or circumstances where you may need to borrow money. So understanding what your credit looks like now may be really helpful for down the line. Understand what your debt is. Do you have an effective plan to reduce or eliminate debt? Because you want to anticipate, what does the future hold? What kind of costs will I incur? And we'll talk about that shortly. But looking at where you are now, maybe you're comfortable making those payments with the debt that you have, but is it time to accelerate paying that debt off? Understand the impact of co-signing a loan. All right. What does debt to income mean? How impactful are late or missed payments? So understanding what your credit situation is. And if you're not the financial guru, look for a trusted resource. For example, the credit union, Neighbors Federal Credit Union, we offer free financial counseling. And I like to stress free financial counseling because there are lots of services out there that come with a cost. Always look for something free. Look for a trusted resource and look for something that is not going to add to your financial strain. Your banking assessment. So we've talked about a budget, we've talked about credit, but we want to talk about something even more basic in terms of finances. Do you know how much money you have? How financially aware are you? I know that there are different types of money personalities. We talked about personalities in the beginning, but what type of financial personality are you? You could be a person that avoids money. And so it's critical at this stage that you understand how much money you have. What is your average daily balance? Do you experience overdrafts? How are you managing your checking account? Savings. What does your savings account look like? Is there an emergency fund? Every person should have an emergency fund, at least with $1,000, although the recommended amount is 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Is there regular savings? Is there retirement savings? Take advantage of time saving resources. Again, all of this is just for your basic banking. Using things like automatic deposits, direct deposits, online banking, mobile banking, because time will become sometimes critical for you. And so being able to utilize these tools to where you can bank right from home will become important. Now I want to talk a little bit about managing your loved one's finances. So the focus so far has been on your finances, assessing where you are, what you can do, how you can help. But now we want to look at what is your loved one's financial situation? Be open about your responsibility with your immediate family. So when I was a caregiver for my dad, I was his wife. I had 2 kids. I think they were in high school, middle school and high school at that time. And it was important for me to be open and have open communication with them about what the situation was and how things might change in terms of our finances, how I had to help dad financially, where we were financially. Does that mean that maybe we weren't going to go on a vacation this year? Maybe we weren't going to be able to do some of the things that we typically did. So you want to be responsible and have that open live communication about what finances look like. Think about changes in routine. As I mentioned, my kids were in sports. And so when I started becoming a caregiver for my dad, that did mean that I missed a couple of games. Financial changes that may occur, housing accommodations. Again, depending on what stage your loved one is in, do you have to make modifications to your house? My dad, we actually took out a tub and put in a roll-in shower simply because we were anticipating if he ever got to the point where he was not able to sit in the tub or get in the tub, we would still be able to transport him into a shower and make sure that we would be able to clean him as easily as possible. Social life. How might this impact social life? Personal time, family time. All right. Looking at all of those things. Looking at the expenses that a caregiver might have. Food. If you're caring for somebody that may have special diet, what type of medications do they need? Transportation, grooming, entertainment. These are all things that a caregiver may have to consider when they're taking care of someone else. And then what is the financial status of that loved one? Are they independent? Are they completely aware of their expenses, their debts, their assets? They're able to handle their financial affairs at this stage. They can do it all on their own. Or maybe they need assistance. They understand how much money they have. They know what bills need to be paid, but maybe they just need a little help being organized. Maybe it's easier for you to write out a check or to get online and pay it for them, but they're fully aware of what's going on. Or it could be a situation where they're fully dependent on someone else to take care of their financial affairs. They're not really clear cognitively of what's going on, what money they have, and what needs to be taken care of. So that's really important to identify what they understand and what type of assistance they need. And again, this will go back to understanding what your role is, and then what authorization do you have as a caregiver? Are you the person that if they need full help with their assistance with their finances, are you that person that can make those decisions? Can you write those checks? Can you pay those bills? Do you have to consult with another person or several persons? Something else that you want to consider too is also identifying and managing financial risk. That can be the use of a debit card or a credit card beyond financial means. Is that person spending money and not aware of the fact that they're creating debt? It could be through online shopping, it could be through donations, it could be through bills that they've forgotten to pay. And that's why it's essentially crucial to understand what their cognitive ability is to take care of their finances so that they're not taking actions that can increase their debt. There's a risk of fraud or scams, right? They could be targeted by phone, email, online. And so you want to be aware of what is happening with them financially in this regard. Making sure that they're not in a situation where they would easily give away their sensitive information. This is a concern for any person at any age, but with our individuals that may need care, they're more available. They're more available to answer phone calls. They're more available sometimes to sit online and click on links that may take them to places where their information can be stolen. So we want to be really, really careful of that. Risk of theft, and this is something that's always a concern. Are they keeping their information out in the open where it's exposed, unsecured, and any person visiting the home can access, take a check, use a debit card, steal a credit card, making sure that information is secured. And then we also have to make sure that there's not risk of theft by people that we know, a family friend, or maybe even another caregiver. So these are all things that we want to make sure that we're looking for and making sure that we're taking actions to protect our loved ones' finances. You want to make sure you have limited access, making sure those things like debit cards, credit cards, any financial information is not left out in the open so that if you do have other caregivers coming in the house, it's not something that's easily accessible. You want to make sure you're monitoring accounts regularly. And this, again, this is going to be for both you as a caregiver, your personal accounts, and your loved ones. Always monitor your accounts because fraud is very, very prevalent. Every day I see at the credit union where we're having to fight this particular area. Establish legal safeguards, things such as power of attorneys. Again, when you're talking with other family members, if there's one person or several persons that are going to be in control, that have the authority to make decisions, make it legal. Have a power of attorney in place. Decide what those spending limits are. Make those guidelines, and again, have it in writing. Keep receipts and go back to that original tool that we talked about, a journal. Your journal will be very helpful tool. Sometimes the smallest little pieces of information that you write down that at the time may seem insignificant can come back and be really, really useful and powerful. Understanding not only how cognitive your loved one is and their ability to take care of their information. If you find yourself in a situation where my dad was fine one day and the next day he wasn't, it was a scavenger hunt. It was trying to figure out, well, where is dad financially? Because if you remember, I told you he was a very private person. So we didn't know his finances. We know he lived in a nice house. He always had food to eat. There was always air. He had a vehicle. So it looked like life was great. But when he became ill and unable to take care of his finances, it felt like a scavenger hunt because I had to figure out how much income is dad making. He had a part-time job. How much is from his part-time job? How much is from his retirement? What does he have in savings? Is anybody else providing financial support for this person? If they are working now, how sustainable is that income? Can they work another 6 months? Another 2 years? Looking at that information and trying to gather all that information so that you can now put together a plan for that person. That's the assets. Now let's look at the debts and the obligations. Who do they owe? The ability to check bank statements. And it's a little bit more challenging because before bank statements came in the mail. So maybe it was just a matter of opening up the kitchen drawer and finding those statements and looking through that information. But if it's online banking, can you get access to that information? You won't be able to walk into a financial institution without something like a power of attorney and gain access to your loved one's information if you're not joint on that account. All right, so looking at bank statements, mail, other documents to assess who do they owe? What do they owe? What are their living expenses? What other bills do they have? When is that debt due? I think that was something that was very paralyzing for me, knowing that he had a light bill, knowing that he had a water bill. When are these things due? How is he paying them? How frequently is he paying them? How is it being paid? Is it being paid automatically drafted? Do I need to go and pay it by check, by debit card? So really understanding your loved one's financial obligations. The sooner you do these things, actually, the better. You may not see a need for it now, but you want to make sure you have a handle on it in case the day comes where you may have to be fully in charge of those finances. It'll be a lot easier to do it when it's not a panic situation. Becoming an authorized person. How do you become that person that's in charge? How can you go and find out about that person's business affairs? We'd love to be able to say, well, I'm so and so's wife, I'm his daughter, I have his best interests in heart. Unfortunately, that is not how most business entities run. If your name is not associated with an account, then they may be limited to being able to even acknowledge that your loved one has an account. So start by contacting the business, learn what their guidelines are, what their processes or their procedures. Do they require a power of attorney? If so, what specifically does it need to say? Because there are different types of power of attorneys and they give you different authorizations or permissions, right? So finding out what that business needs. Use discretion when possible. When you're talking to any business, take notes. That's probably back to that journal again. I'd have to take notes. Who did I speak to? What did they say? What information did I need to provide? Schedule follow-ups. No one's going to care for your loved one as much as you do. And so it's going to be necessary times that you have to follow up, even with other family members, definitely with businesses. If they were supposed to get back to you in a week and they didn't, pick up the phone and call them back to make sure that you're taking care of that loved one's business. Common paths to becoming an authorized person, power of attorney. You want to be very detailed about what task you want that power of attorney to do. I see it all the time in the credit union. Individuals come in with the power of attorney. And the one thing that it doesn't say is that they can perform financial functions. Well, guess what? We can't accept that power of attorney. There are medical power of attorneys in case you have to make medical decisions on their behalf. So be sure that you seek out a power of attorney and that you're very detailed as to what functions you need that power of attorney to allow you to do. Understand that power of attorneys are not accepted everywhere. It is at the discretion of the business. Most of them will take it, but they're not required to take it. So again, that's where you want to call first and ask those questions before you spend a lot of money to bring a power of attorney to a business and they won't accept it. Finally, as we get closer to the end, sufficient funds. Understanding where that loved one's funds are. Do they have enough funds? Do they need any financial assistance? Because again, they may be independent, they may be able to function on their own, and that's a great state to be. But you also want to discuss with your loved ones, what are their wishes? Things are great now, but what are their wishes financially going forward? Anticipate future financial needs and then adjust your budget accordingly. Do we want to get rid of debt, liquidate assets, review your insurance coverages? Have those discussions now. If for whatever reason there's not enough funds, excuse me, I drink a little water. Excuse me. If that person does not have enough funds, look at what their expenses are so that you can make a distinction between their needs and their wants. Look at supplemental income resources if there is a deficit in their budget. SNAP benefits, nonprofit organizations that provide assistance not just for individuals with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, but just in general for individuals that are in need. Meals on Wheels, prescription assistance, 211 services. These are all resources that can help aid the individual that you're taking care of if they don't have enough funds to take care of their basic needs. And again, don't be afraid to ask for help. Finally, the last thing before I'll stop and take questions is anticipating expenses. Look at what you might have to incur, expenses you may have to incur in the future. Increase in doctor visits. Maybe now it's once every 6 months. What happens when it changes to once a month or more frequently? What medical supplies might you need? What medical equipment? What about prescriptions? Are there special diets? Again, these are things that are very critical, especially if you're in the beginning, if you just receive a diagnosis, and these may seem light years away, but you definitely want to start giving thought to those things, looking at pricing, looking at costs. And again, this goes into looking at what your finances are. We may be good today, but what happens when these expenses, if they happen, if you have to happen to incur them? Respite care, time off for an acute illness. If you have to stay with that person on an ongoing, maybe 24-hour basis, and maybe you have to take some time off from work. Increase in general housing expenses, more laundry, more food, just depending on the circumstances. So you want to look at where you are now, but also just look at what are the possible scenarios that could happen that can be out of pocket expenses, things that may not be covered by insurance or a particular program. All right. Excuse me. I'll pause at this point to see if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful as always. Thank you so much, Ms. Kim. So as we have some questions in the chat, I'll read them out. So please feel free to go ahead and enter those in the chat. There was a question about the budget that you shared. Are you able to send that to me, Ms. Kim, and then I'll send it in a follow-up email to everybody?
Absolutely. I will get that to you.
Great. And then someone said that they liked the term scavenger hunt. That's something that we preach over here a lot is, keeping your information in a space so that your loved ones can find it. We also have here a couple of different booklets within our resource library that is an easy space for you to compile all of those things. One of those that have talked about before is what we call a caregiver binder. If anybody has any questions about something like that, I'm happy to talk with you about that too. We also have a question about, do you recommend putting your name like as a family caregiver on your loved ones' checking accounts, savings accounts, all of that good stuff?
So that's a very good question. And it depends on, again, that relationship and then the level of authority. If you feel safe that that person is not going to put you decrease or maybe make your financial situation worse, because again we have to look at what are the risks. Are they shopping online? Are they easily giving out information? Are they incurring debt? You don't want to put your name associated to where that could then inhibit your own finances. But if you're in a situation where yes, you need to take control of their finances, you're going to be the person that's going to be overseeing their debit card purchases, credit card purchases, then that can be a very powerful tool for you because it makes you have easy access to their spending, to what they're doing with their funds. And so it really just depends on that relationship. I was able to become joint on all of my dad's accounts because that was not something that I had to be concerned with. And it did make the whole process a lot easier when I had to take care of bills and take care of any of his financial affairs.
Got it. Got it. Um, I also, can you speak a little bit about the free financial counseling that y'all offer at the credit union that you work at? Can you speak about what that's like? Because I imagine that a lot of people feel resistance or feel scared to dive into budgeting for themselves, and it can be helpful to have a professional do it alongside with you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking about that. And so at Neighbors, we have a number of certified financial counselors, and I can understand the hesitation to even wanting to explore what finances look like, but this is what we do on a daily basis. You have an opportunity, we can meet you wherever you want in terms of coming in and sitting down one on one, having a virtual session or even a phone call. And it's just an opportunity for you to come in and ask questions. We can sit down. If you don't know where to start with the budget, right? I explained it. I made it look easy, right? But maybe it's a little bit more challenging for you. We can sit down with you and we can create a budget. We know what questions to ask, we know what information to ask you to bring in. If it's credit, we can do a free credit review. We can access your credit report. If it's your loved one with their authorization, if they're with you, we can access their credit report so that you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. We can help you put together a plan. If you're trying to figure out, well, what do we do going forward? We have medical bills, we have medical needs. We can help you put together a plan. How can you tackle this? And so we have a bird's eye view and the expertise in terms of being able to look at those numbers and help you understand where you are, have that conversation, what are your financial goals, and then help you establish a blueprint plan of how to get there. And again, all of our consultation sessions are free.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And, especially in this world of caregiving, it's expensive. It's an expensive journey a lot of times, both taxing monetarily and, emotionally, physically. And so by having that free support is just such a great asset. So I'll also try to get a flyer from you about that or something, and we can have that in our resource library. And in the follow-up email that I'll send next week after all 3 sessions are completed, I'll also have Miss Kimberly's contact information in there too. One last thing that I wanted to say, and then I'll kind of get any final words from Miss Kimberly, is that she had mentioned respite care a couple of times. If y'all are unfamiliar with our respite reimbursement program here, it is a program that we have that can financially support anybody diagnosed with dementia. If your family is paying for extra help to come in, we have a program that can reimburse those costs up to $1,000 a year, and that doesn't have an income cap or anything. As long as you live within our service area and have a dementia diagnosis, you reach out to us, we send you the paperwork, we add you to the system. So I wanted to mention that as well, as we're talking about respite and finances and things that can help. Ms. Kimberly, you got any other closing remarks?
I would just say again, reiterate, don't feel any kind of way about asking for help. Always, reach out to the resources that are available to you. Definitely, again, for the financial resources, we'd love to sit down and meet with you and talk about finances and help you understand the finances better so that you can be comfortable. Anything that we can do to make your life a little bit easier. Give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. It's, it can be a challenging journey, and that was something that I had to learn along the way. I can remember in the beginning talking to other individuals that had gone through the journey that I was beginning, and I remember the language of, oh, I'm so glad that I did this. And it was an honor and it was my privilege. It was a privilege to be a caregiver. And understand at the beginning, I didn't see it from that perspective. It was difficult. It was challenging. It was getting up and giving somebody medicine the wee hours of the morning and the wee hours of the night. But you learn and you grow and you give yourself grace and you make mistakes and you learn from those mistakes. And then on the other side of the journey, I can definitely see exactly what they meant.
Thank you, Ms. Kimberly. We so appreciate you, as always, your talent and your expertise that you are so generous with our services. So thank you so much. I'll send a follow-up email, like I said, next week after our last session that includes all of that good stuff that we're talking about today. But if anybody has any needs prior to then, just give us a call. We have a few comments in the chat just thanking you for such a great presentation, Ms. Kimberly, and we'll see you again next time.
Always my pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Y'all take care.